Welcome to Horticulture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture.
Hello.
Yeah, I know. Two of us. We don't make as much noise with just two. Just Ray and Jess today. The other two
Just
pod
two of
peeps are
us.
off doing big things. Just us pre-holiday today.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we have to do that for holiday special. We call them special episodes, and we do say sometimes that they're shorter episodes. We've learned not to say that because even with only two of us, sometimes we go the full allotted time of around an hour.
Yeah, I think that happened last year. We were like, this is going to be a short 20-minute, maybe 30-minute episode. And then we went the
It was
entire
over an
time
hour.
talking
Yeah, we
about
may have actually went
holiday
longer.
plants or something.
Yes,
Yeah.
we digressed and expounded and did all the things. And the episode is we're not going to make that promise today that it'll be a shorter episode,
Right.
even though we are in the midst of holidays, spelled HOLIDAZE, because that's what I
Yes.
feel like. We're from kind of Halloween, which I know is a whole thing at your house, Jessica.
Yes,
Halloween
definitely.
it is at our house too. Between that and New Year's, it's just one big blur for us.
Yeah.
It
All
is it's
the
a lot.
Burr, what do they say? Like the Burr holidays, right? It starts
Yeah.
with September, October, November, December. It just like goes nonstop. Yeah,
Yes.
we're getting ready for Thanksgiving and
I call
trying
that
to
the forgotten
coordinate.
holiday. I
The
mean,
forgotten holiday?
sometimes it gets sandwiched in between like two big decorating holidays, like Halloween and Christmas, but I shall not forget Thanksgiving.
Mm-mm.
I shall
Shall not.
celebrate it as much as I can. I may not decorate as much, but I will celebrate Thanksgiving. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah, getting ready, trying to coordinate all the meals. If you're fortunate, I know sometimes some bigger families get frustrated that they have multiple ones to go to, but you should
Too
be
much good food.
thankful you have multiple dinners to go to, right?
Enjoy
But
the
trying
bounty.
to coordinate those on their own individual day versus,
Oh my goodness.
my
Yeah,
husband and
with
I one
other
year went to
families.
like 2 or 3 dinners, like all in like a 24-hour period, and we were like, never again.
Food comas.
Food coma.
Just yeah, I tell you, the key to happiness may be stretchy pants when that is involved, and dressing comfortably, and plan on no activities after that meal. Just kind of sit and digest. And
Mhm.
remember, Jessica, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
That's
But
right.
am I able to pace myself? No, I just absolutely blow it out for the first deviled eggs that I see, and it wrecks me for the rest of the Thanksgiving meals. It's all about deviled eggs for me.
Yeah. And
That's
there's different houses have different like things you look forward to,
like
right?
different
Like
kind of traditions
yeah,
or whatever.
traditions
Yeah.
or just like
Yeah.
what they're serving,
Yes.
what
Mhm.
my like mom's like the stuffing, that's what I'm looking forward to at her house,
Mhm.
right? Or the broccoli casserole versus like
Oh,
my
the
grandma always
casseroles.
makes this great ham, right? And so I'm excited about the ham
Well,
because she
I'm
doesn't
glad
like
you mentioned
turkey.
protein. You mentioned protein. People that at least I've talked to, and myself included, when we talk about like all the wonderful food, I'm talking about all the carbs. Like you said, casserole, and
Yes.
I didn't hear anything else about what you said except for stuffing. Now, stuffing balls, that's kind of a newer thing within our family. It's actually the round balls of stuffing, which has more crust, but it's all the carbs. But there is actually protein, ham and turkey for
Turkey.
Thanksgiving. So what are you? Are you team carb or team protein for primarily
I guess
for
I would be
Thanksgiving, or both?
carb, I guess, because I really do love all the sides.
Oh, I
I love all
do.
the sides, but I
Yeah.
love turkey too. I have been known to request my birthday is in March, and I have been known to request Thanksgiving for my birthday meal because I like turkey and stuffing and broccoli casserole and all of
All the
those
traditional
things.
fixins.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
So
absolutely. What else do you guys do? Because usually for Thanksgiving, do you guys have anything that you do every year? I mean, some people kind of right afterwards put up a tree, or some people watch some sports, or maybe a parade. Like, what do you guys do?
yeah, our thing is I always remember growing up, we'd always watch the Macy's Thanksgiving Day
Oh,
parade and
absolutely.
then
Yeah.
always like hope to get to watch it till the end to see Santa. Because all of our family, we don't live that far away, but it was about an hour drive to get to their house. Are we going to be able to see Santa before we have to get in the car and then
Oh,
drive to get there?
yeah.
But now I
Yeah.
think they like replay it throughout the day because we've watched it and then we've gone to a relative's house for Thanksgiving and the TV's on in the background with football going.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if somebody flicks the channel over, it might be on they replay the parade, I think they now.
Yeah, and it seems like the coverage over time, which a parade was a big tradition for me. It was like my thing to get up, and I was like, "What time's the parade start? What time does the parade start?" You know, I grew up with antenna TV, and fortunately, that was a channel that we could get. But now the coverage is just so sophisticated of the parade, and it seems like they have a camera on every, unit coming through the parade, every balloon, every
Mhm.
inflatable. But it's pretty wild, the sophistication of that. And I watched a special one time on the preparations that go into that. It's just amazing. But to me,
Yeah.
the Thanksgiving Day parade is like the big show. That is right at the core of Thanksgiving for me. I mean, that started off the sort of the egg stilling. The deviled egg stilling time period where the parade just before lunch or whatever would start, and that's when I would start trolling the kitchen trying to sneak
Yeah.
goodies
Yeah, like
growing
I
up.
said, our thing would be like, "Oh, there's Santa. It's official. It's go time." Like, now
Like
it's
it's
time
now it's
for
hot now.
yeah.
Did I kick
And
off
then
Christmas for you guys?
yeah, I think so, like, after
Yeah,
that, but
yeah.
it's something that my mom and I have talked about recently that used to be fun, but is not anymore, is Black Friday, and some people might be like, "You are crazy about that it used to be fun," but there was, like a
Yeah,
sweet period with
yeah.
that where
There
it was
was
actually fun, where you would get up and
holiday
go
energy.
and yeah, and most of the times, the few times that I actually went out and did it, um, most of the people were nice. Right?
Yeah.
It wasn't
Oh,
like
yeah.
what you see with, like, the people fighting and knocking each other down, but my interaction with most people are nice, but now, like, you get online and, the Black Friday sales and savings have been going all month, or
And
people just
nobody is waiting until the day after Thanksgiving, so I think a lot of that's been divided up, that shopping, but, it hits different. I do remember a time period, Jessica, when there was no such thing as, like, Black Friday sales, and then people started having sales the day after Thanksgiving to kick off the Christmas shopping season, and there was this really cool period where it became a thing, but it wasn't such a big thing that everything was just overran in person. But then it got so popular there for a while before the popularity gained online that everybody seemed like they were in person in a store.
Mhm.
And then that's when it kind of became inconvenient because of just long lines, but the sales were really good and they were really truly on that one day the
Yep.
biggest sales, but that doesn't seem to be the case anymore.
Right, yeah, I remember people would, like, dress up in, like, holiday gear, and you would see, people getting up at the crack of dawn to go
Oh
shopping, and
yeah,
then people going out and getting breakfast together because everyone's up at these
sure.
weird hours, um, to just go
Yeah.
and get
I,
these
wa-
to make
I,
Christmas magical for their children, right?
Absolutely. And I remember several years ago, and it's when I first moved to central Kentucky, it must have been 14, 15 years ago, that I'd gotten up and Jennifer and I decided to go really early to, go shopping in person and do all the holiday things. And we had the first snow that year, and it had started happening the day after Thanksgiving, and the timing was perfect. And that's one of those memories that kind of just sticks around in my head.
Mhm.
And I remember that. But that cool in person shopping experience, and I think as much as anything to me, it was that holiday energy, that
Right.
people had, and the Christmas music's playing in the mall or in shopping, centers and things, and I
A
loved
lot
all
of
that.
places do, and this kinda ties in, kind of, talking about trees, um, people do their tree lightings, right,
Yeah. Oh
after
yeah.
Thanksgiving, like, I also
Yeah.
remember that, as a kid, because we didn't always have I grew up with a fire department family, so we don't always have the holidays you celebrate the holidays on the
Yeah.
actual holidays, and, we would have Thanksgiving at a later date, and that would sometimes would coincide when Lexington was doing their big tree lighting, because a lot
Hmm.
of them, put the Christmas trees up that weekend, and then it's a celebration to light the Christmas tree for the holiday season.
Yeah, but it goes so quick. There's just so much packed in there to get it all done, especially if you have, children or an expanded family. It's just hard to cram everything in. I just encourage everybody to have a good time with it. and try to, as much as possible, don't go get caught up in all the activities to the point to where you're kind of stressed.
Mhm.
Just enjoy that time, enjoy, gathering with people, and yeah, don't stand in those long lines to the point of rage. Um, but saying all of that, Jessica, you did remind us this is a horticulture podcast, and you did mention trees a couple of times, which that's a very timely seasonal topic, even though it's winding down here in Kentucky, zone 6 mostly, with some zone 7 here in Kentucky. There's still things to be done in our landscapes, in and around our landscapes, isn't there? So
Yeah.
we're not done yet. We're not done
Yeah.
yet.
And this is very timely as we are recording this episode. Actually, tomorrow, I'm getting ready to do a big tree planting project with our local tree board at one of
Oh,
our
wow.
local parks. We're hoping
Yeah.
to get 29 trees planted in the ground tomorrow. So this
29.
is
What kind of trees are we talking about here? Are they like
we
balled and burlapped or container or
They
bare
will
root?
be a mix. So we
Okay.
will have a couple of really large ones that are ball and
Mm-hmm.
burlap that might actually have to have some equipment to help unload them,
Yeah.
uh, and a lot of container trees as well, but a little bit on the larger side because we're trying to
Mm-hmm.
plant for shade and some wind to help with the wind out at a park near a bunch of our soccer fields. So and a variety of native trees too. So
Oh,
we're trying to
wonderful.
not do a monoculture of trees and have a variety of native shade trees to be planted out at the park.
I
But
love the fact you said a variety, because that's one thing I've seen. I work in a kind of a horse farm country, and a lot of those larger farms, they'll have a big monoculture planting because they look nice, uniformity and everything. It looks very nice. So they'll have a big row of maples or pin oaks or whatever. And if it's anything I've come to appreciate over time, it's the fact that if you have many, many of one type of tree, and a problem comes in, a disease or insect problem comes in and hits one of those trees, it's likely that it's going to hit many, many of those trees in that big monolithic planting, that big monoculture planting, as variety. And I talk about that so much with our farms now, and encourage them to plant a variety of trees so that they spread out. They kind of manage the risk in one disease or one insect problem coming in and just wiping out
yeah.
trees. Love that.
And that's a kind of ties in with this planting of a goal of that because everyone loves like the red maples this year. They were
Oh,
bright and
beautiful.
beautiful,
The younger
right?
ones, especially, I don't know what it was. They were beautiful.
Yeah. So we tried to select, trees, native trees that are going to do well in our soils, are going to do well to withstand, our climate, our environment. But we also tried to select ones that will have some of that fall color. So,
Yeah.
and it hopefully will bring, when people are out there using those soccer fields and as these trees grow, they're not only going to appreciate them for their shade and the blocking of the wind, being a windbreak, but seeing that fall color and being like, "Oh, hey, maybe that is something I can add in my own yard," right? Have
It would almost be
an
like a
alternative plant.
showplace or a demonstration garden almost. So
Exactly.
yeah, and
Yeah.
you can talk about varieties and what makes colors and all of that fun stuff. Are you
Mhm.
guys mainly doing deciduous trees this fall?
Yes. So that is
Yeah.
the time. That's a great point to make. Uh Now, like in the end of October through December, really until the ground really gets frozen, is a great time to plant our deciduous trees. Evergreens, we tend to wait more till the springtime,
Hmm.
but the deciduous ones, it is go time because they've already dropped their leaves. They're not putting all that energy into keeping those leaves alive. Um, they will get established and they will do some growing in the winter and they'll focus the tree will focus on growing more of its own roots and getting established versus when we plant them in the spring there's that not really a competition. I don't know if that's the best way to say it, but it's trying to produce leaves, but at the same time it's also trying to grow roots and get established, and survival rate tends to go down. They not as they have a harder time getting established if we're planting them that time of year versus in the dormant season.
And it's always been interesting to me that, yeah, 100% fall is the best time for deciduous trees. It's always been interesting to me that I see a greater retail availability in the spring rather than the fall of trees. It's just they're more available. Now, that's not to say you can't plant in the spring. You certainly can, but it's a distant second to the best time of year, which is for deciduous trees. And you mentioned the one thing, the critical marker for me is when deciduous trees have dropped their leaves. That's an awesome time. They're going to sleep. And that's typically the time of year we have more moisture. That is the time, like you said, go time. And I think the soil typically is a little bit easier to dig into this time of year. If you can avoid, like if it's after a rainy period, the soil also dries out slower this time of year. So never dig in wet soil because that can cause all sorts of problems. But yeah, a great time of the year to do that. And it sounds like that's a pretty good sized project with a mixture of, you said, different kinds of trees going in the ground as far as kind of the root situation on those.
Yeah, yeah, so we're hoping, different, um, oaks. We have different oaks, different all
Yeah.
sorts of different kinds that are coming, maples, some of our other, uh, native, different, like, black gums, different things
Oh,
like
yeah, that's a
that,
fun one. Yeah.
but
Uh, When I was just going to ask you real quick, one thing that I usually like to talk about, but are you guys doing, like on the maple specifically, like a tree wrap to avoid some of those common problems with thin skinned trees planted in the wintertime?
we don't plan to. What our concern is in that planting location is more of,
Hmm.
even though it is going dormant, it's dormant season and grass is not actively and the weeds aren't actively growing as much, we are more concerned about weed eater and mower
Oh
damage
gosh,
that
the
can
number
occur.
one thing I would say for me, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that can kill a tree really quickly. I was telling Ray before we got started, I had a tree care class, and gave examples of the quickest way to kill your tree, and that is with that weed eater or mower hitting it. And so, with our planting project, we're trying to get the trees in the ground, planting at the proper depth, and we can talk more about that too. Getting them mulched the correct way, no volcano
Yeah.
mulch, and then
If
putting,
Alexis was on here today, she would be raging at that, the
yes,
volcano
volcano
mulch
mulch is
situation.
the worst. Everyone who's listening, you've seen it. You've seen it at parking lots. I don't know why we still do it, because not to get off on that, but that's another great way to kill a tree is piling mulch all up on that trunk. It needs to be brushed back, needs to look like a donut, right? We want 2 to 3 inches of mulch around the tree out to the drip line, and have about an inch or two pulled back away from that trunk of the tree. You need to
Oh,
be able to
yeah.
see the flare of that trunk.
Especially young trees that are, tend to have thinner bark any which way, and they're in a stress state when they go in the ground. And it doesn't, and a stress tree is one that's more prone to, I think, insect damage. And it being younger, can't tolerate as much of that mulch touching the bark. It holds moisture, it encourages rot, encourages insect issues, all of those bad things. Now, saying that, mulching is a very good thing, but mulching all the way up against the trunk is a very bad thing. So yeah, that's a great point, and that's one of the most important things I think people can do is, regardless of what kind of tree you put out, is mulching, especially if you plant that into sod is, lots of other good benefits, like moisture retention, and it cools the soil, especially for young trees. But even more than all of that, it keeps all of the lawn equipment away from that tree because my goodness, young trees, and just see this so much planted at schools, planted in cities and towns and on farms and at home. It's so easy to just a little minor bump when that tree's, let's say, a 3-inch caliper tree. It just takes a little bump that disturbs a third of the bark around that tree, which isn't much if you think of a young tree. But that pretty much limits the lifespan of that tree. And it may actually, if it's more than a third of the way around the tree, that damage may just kill the whole plant in a year or two or sooner. But yeah, mulch does lots of good things. But one of the things it does is keeps the string trimmers of doom away from
That's
that
right.
very sensitive bark. And I'm sure, Jessica, you said you had some folks from like your local municipalities there, and that's something I bet you really stressed those folks too.
Yeah, we went through planting trees,
Hmm.
but also with tree care, right? With proper pruning cuts, right? Making sure that you're pruning properly at the right time of year. So when you cut a big branch off a tree, it's not going to strip the bark down the side of the tree where the tree won't be able to recover, or it'll take a
Yeah.
long time to recover, which just lets in, it's a perfect opportunity for other disease and insects to come
Hmm.
in. Um, Talked about mowers hitting it, talked about watering sometimes, how much you need to give water a new tree versus like
Very difficult. Yeah.
if you love it too hard, right? You love it too much. Or a big one that we often see is when people are planting new trees, they might have a area that has a lot of clay in it or something. And they dig out
Mm,
the hole and we want to make, the hole 2 to 3 times wider than like the roots are on
mhm.
that tree. Um you need to fill in with the soil that you took out. A lot of
Yes,
people are like,
nothing else.
a lot of
Nothing
people
else.
are like, there's lots of clay here, so I'm going to add potting soil or I'm going to add fertilizer. I'm going to add things that make this nice environment for this tree. But what ends up happening is that tree is like, heck yeah, this is a nice environment. And
Mhm.
it starts to grow and the
Like a
roots
pot.
it starts going around in that area that's all nice and loose soil. And then as the tree continues to grow out, it suddenly hits that clay and it's like, oh, this isn't nice and I'm just going
This
to
isn't
stay
good.
here, right? And we'll see trees end up declining and dying, and when we pop them out of the ground, their roots are just a big circle, like they've girdled themselves because they've just stayed in that nice environment. So uh always just put native soil back in, and you don't need to add any fertilizer.
Folks just want to kind of amend that to make it better, but there's nothing I could think of I would put in there. Not even high quality potting soil, because, like you said, it doesn't behave like native soil, and the roots love to be in there. And not only that, but if you don't are not watering properly, if you fill that up with just a bunch of potting soil, that's going to dry out so much quicker than our native soils. It just is not a good situation
Yeah.
when you put that in. So that's a great point, and I have to stress that a lot because it always comes from the folks have rocky soils or a lot of heavy clay, which can cause a lot of problems, and you have
And
to be
it's
really
good
cautious about that.
intentions, right? It's
Yes, yes.
good. It's like so
The
good. And
logic
you're
is seems
like,
good. The logic seems good.
you
If it's good for a
loved it
pot,
too
yeah,
hard.
yeah. You loved it too much, and you mentioned heavy clay soils. We used to do a test. I started out working in commercial landscaping, and when it was really heavy clay soils, we'd do almost like an informal perk test. We would dig out, a sort of a dish, shaped area that we're going to plant, let's say a tree. And I will tell you, Jessica, you need to talk more about this here in a second, but it is a hard sell to tell people when you already have a rather large root ball that they really need to dig that hole 2 to 3 times wider than the root ball, because that's an
Right.
incredible amount of work. That's really important. But we used to do an informal perk test on heavy clay soils to test suitability. And sometimes I'd call it the coffee can test, where we dig out with posto diggers, to a depth that we think we're going to place a root ball and see how quickly that would drain after we filled it up with water. And there was just some locations that were so heavy clay that I've seen root balls put into a commercial planting situation, big, expensive trees, and they float out and fall over. They float out
Wow.
of the soil. And I've had that happen several times. And after that, I just started doing perk tests for larger installations. But if you really are questioning in your mind, uh, the suitability of a site, just do that. See how, and there's you can look up timing online of how long it should take, and it's a lot like a sewage perk test, but it also works for trees. It's a great thing to do.
And we actually have a publication on doing perk tests for trees.
Hmm.
So it has, just like you mentioned, the times and things to look for. So we could probably try to link that at the
Yeah,
end of this.
I keep forgetting we've got that
For
really good
Yeah, and
publication.
I think there's a video that goes along with it too. If you're, worried about the drainage where you're thinking about planting some trees, and also to keep in mind, like not every tree is happy in those locations. So maybe if you do
Yeah,
have an area that holds a lot of water, that's your opportunity to consider getting like a willow or maybe a
bald
cypress.
cypress. Yeah.
Yeah. Um you got to think about that too when picking out those variety of trees in the location. Another thing that I run into a lot with trees and planting trees are at new builds, and people have had their
Hmm.
topsoil taken or it's been compacted down a lot by heavy equipment,
Oh
and
yeah,
then
hard pans.
the
Uh,
trees just struggle in those
Or they might do
situations.
well for 2 or 3 years, but when those roots hit a hard pan, if it's heavily compacted, then all of a sudden you have decline. You go out and take a look, and yeah, I've seen roots literally go down, and you'll see almost a 90-degree angle of those roots where they have to go out. They can't penetrate down, especially for taprooted trees like some of your oaks. It's
Mhm.
really tough on those if it's really heavily compacted. Yeah.
Continuing with this, thinking of another home visit of like a planting of a young tree that was planted that declined, something that's very important that I think used to be like a there's a lot of things, that we used to do that we don't do now, right? With planting trees, like painting wounds when you like
Yeah.
prune trees. Um, but making sure if you're doing a ball and burlap tree that you get all of that burlap off of that root ball and all of the wire, the cage, to the best that you can
Yeah.
off of it. I've been on a home visit before where a gentleman had a tree that died, and he finally was just like, "I'm gonna pull it out." And I was like, "Okay, well, let's take a look at it." And once we got it out of the ground, the wire cage was completely left on, and the roots had wrapped around the wire cage, and
Hmm.
it girdled itself, right? And so
It'll,
that's why
yeah,
it declined.
destroy the roots.
So if you are choosing to do ball and burlap, try, definitely take all that burlap off. Get the cut that wire basket off as much as you can before planting. And if you're doing a container one, a lot of times those roots they wrap themselves around in those pots. It's a good idea to rough up those roots a little bit before planting containers. And then the same thing with if you're doing a bare root plant, sometimes they have their roots are might be kind of broken or whatever, and you can trim those up a little bit. You don't want to trim them a lot. But with all three of those different types of ways you can get trees, when it comes to planting them in the ground, we always need to make sure to look for that root flare on the trunk of that tree. And you can see it even on those little tiny sticks that you get for
Oh,
free
yeah.
sometimes.
The
Um,
color difference you can watch for on that, yeah.
yeah, because you wanna make sure not to plant them too deep, because that's another thing that we see that happens, or
Mhm.
people plant their trees a little too deep, and then that will cause the tree to start to decline as well.
I've even seen the recommendation, Jessica, depending on if you have, one of the three main types, balled and burlapped, container grown, or bare root. I've even seen on larger trees of lifting that an inch or two above to allow for settling, especially if you have loose soil in the bottom of the hole. If you have to err on the side of planting a tiny bit higher, especially for larger trees that have a lot of maybe loose soil in the bottom, because that will settle some.
Mhm.
But that's a good info, Jessica. That each type of tree that you purchase is a little bit different. There's nuances to each. I mean, there's things I like about each, and things I watch out for each. For instance, I know that on container grown plants, I really like pulling that off, and like you said, scruffing up the roots. And container grown stock, if it's held too long, sometimes has roots that start to circle. That's a big problem years down the road of trees like maples. You'll see girdling roots, which is a more common problem than you would think, where the roots encircle and eventually just strangles the plant or strangles larger roots and causes early decline in the life of that tree. It's a little bit more common if you're not paying attention with container grown plants. So you have to watch out for that. Not only that, but on container grown plants, I visited big nurseries, and I had a nursery I kind of managed. I had to really watch the way that we grew container stock, because those south facing containers, we had to rotate those because you would have like root death on one side of the
Oh.
container. So you kind of got to watch out for that as a homeowner. Make sure all the roots are in good shape, they're living, they're viable. And that's pretty common. That's something we don't talk a lot about, but being on the nursery side for a while, I saw that. But bare root trees I do like. They don't have much presence in the landscape, but I love the fact that, number one, you have to dig a smaller hole because I'm lazy. You have to dig a smaller hole. You do have to be careful how you place the roots. But those seems like those smaller trees, once they get started, they sometimes catch up with a larger tree, maybe that you planted in a container. It's amazing
It
how
is.
quick they just don't have any presence when you stick it out there. It's not instant gratification, and that's the only knock I have against. And it's really sort of it's not a thing except in our minds, but they don't have any presence when you stick them out. So I'm like, we'll put some mulch around it. At least you'll be able to see it a little bit better.
I got to see a great example of one of my volunteers here at the office is a retired forester, and at his house, he has planted so many trees, and he has a great example of that in his own yard where somebody had given him a ball and burlap uh,
Hmm.
oak tree, and I think it might have been a bur oak. We know they grow slower and stuff, but they grow semi fast when they're
Yeah.
in their younger stage. But he had a ball and burlap one and he had a bare root one planted. And over like a 5-year period, that bare root one had almost caught that ball and burlap one. Because when you think about ball and burlap, you like every time they're being harvested, right? They're all the roots are being chopped off.
You're
So
missing
they're
75% of the roots when no matter if you
exactly.
properly prep that, you're missing the root mass
Yeah.
when that's dug. Yeah.
So you might have that instant like, "Oh, there's a tree right there" factor, but it's gonna take that tree time to heal and grow and put on new roots and then really start to be able to grow
Mhm.
again versus those bare root ones, like you said, it's a smaller hole you're planting them in. Those roots are directly, the roots really are not being taken off compared to the root to
You get
shoot
100% of the
ratio.
roots. Yeah.
Yep. And they will often take off a lot faster. If you can prevent critters like deer and rabbits and other things messing with them, and I think like the mowers and not hitting them with weed eaters and stuff. Because I know as a child, I brought home several of those free trees with like Earth Day,
Oh, yeah.
and there was maybe one or two that actually survived because they're
You have to
little,
really be
they're
intentional.
like a
Yeah.
stick, but
And deer damage on those, my goodness, deer damage is one of the depending on where you live. I mean, that can be they'll just go through and just munch everything off those young whips. It's amazing how tasty deer find young tree seedling
mhm.
saplings. So,
But I'm a
yeah.
big fan of, bare root trees,
Yeah,
planting
I
them.
like those. I just don't like the fact you can't see them. But I've planted a lot of those in my life, and I planted the last big planting I did of those was white pines, and they outgrew some container grown pines that had a 2 year start. In 5 years, they were bigger than the container plants. So yeah, I've had really positive results from those. But how about fertilizing? When you first put trees in ground, do you generally stay away from that for several months to a year,
I
or how do you do it?
generally don't fertilize them
Yeah.
at all
Yeah.
unless there is something not I definitely don't fertilize at planting, but
Yeah.
if unless something looks off that following year, then I'll do a soil test, and I know we've said on here lots of times your local if you're in Kentucky, your local county extension office offers soil testing. um, do a soil test then
Mhm.
and see how
Yeah.
things are going. Because a lot of times it's another one of those things like it can hurt it to fertilize it. You
Yeah,
know,
that those salts, which are naturally in a lot of our granular fertilizers, it'll increases kind of the salt concentration in soil, and that is really isn't that really tough on, especially like young tree roots. On It's really really the most tough. I think it's tough on all of them, but especially if you're doing bare root trees that have a lot of young fine roots, it can burn off a lot of those. So you have to really be careful. And I think it was Dr. Fountain, one of our tree specialists, who's now retired. He had in a publication a statement that I always remembered, and he said this in his classes that most trees and shrubs in Kentucky, if they're in a home lawn that's fertilized, if the home lawn's fertilized once a year, you don't need to really add any additional fertilizer once that tree gets up and going. And definitely, you don't need any when that tree is planted. That usually does more harm than good. But I remember that always that he never really recommended additional fertilizer unless it was out in the back of a lawn or something that never gets any fertilizer, and then he would kind of look at that on an individual basis. But yeah, most trees don't need that.
right? You might see it in ones like that are planted in parking lots or something where they're in there
Yeah,
like I don't know. Do we still use the term like a tree coffin? Is that
yeah,
was yeah where there's
really restricted root
yeah,
zone. Yeah,
really,
there you
yeah,
go.
and they
Tree
might
coffin.
need, some
Just some
fertilizer
extra
that way
boost.
because their
Yeah.
pH might be off or, but usually I tell people not even to worry about fertilizing them unless something's
No,
weird
no.
looking on them.
Looking and another thing you mentioned that of course, when we're talking about mature, well-established trees that are several years old, there's maintenance pruning that's done every year. But when I talk to folks that have just put, let's say, a bald and burlap tree in that's 6 foot tall maple, and they ask about like any kind of pruning, they've heard somewheres that they need to balance the roots since they lost a lot of the roots with the top growth. Research has told us time and again, the best thing to do is not do anything like that. The best thing to do is if you have any broken branches or any branches that are rubbing, created wounding, you can create or you can address those structural problems. But unless it's broken or causing a wound or it's scuffed up bark in the canopy, really I don't recommend touching the canopy much on newly planted trees. That's just another
Right.
stressor. But do you hear that, Jessica, that people's like, oh, we have to balance the top and the bottom, and I see people wanting to prune those from
I
time to
I
time.
have seen that, and I've especially seen it more from people who also, like, grow apple trees in their backyard and stuff, because apple pruning is a whole different ball game,
Yeah,
right? Of where,
different
like, you
objectives. Yeah.
yeah, completely different. So if they've had that, they're like, "Oh, I need to, like, do all this pruning on there," but they're completely different. And like you mentioned,
Hmm.
you're only really pruning out anything that might be diseased, rubbing against each other, already broken from a storm. I had planted last fall a little Shumard oak, and right now it looks like a stick in my backyard, right? But unfortunately, and fortunate, it was the only one that really had any cicada damage from this summer. And so normally I would not touch that little tree at all, right? Because
Yeah.
it has maybe like 2 lateral branches on it.
Yeah.
But I did go
Limited.
out and I did prune it some because I could see the flagging, I could see where the cicadas lay their eggs, so I know that branch is, like, gonna come off anyway, so
Yeah.
just to speed up the process and help the tree, I went ahead
You
and
got
just
ahead of it.
snipped
Yeah.
it real quick. But otherwise, pretty easy. Like, we're not like, right, we said we're, like, gonna plant them, we're not gonna fertilize them, and we're not gonna touch them, and we're gonna let them do their thing, we're just
You're gonna
gonna
put them at the proper depth. You're gonna dig a big hole whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
If it has a 36-inch, diameter ball and burlap, on that root ball on that, you're gonna have to dig a pretty good size hole. I mean, that's the hardest sell I have for people is getting them to dig, the proper size hole. The depth is one thing that's pretty easy, but when it comes to adding that width, the sheer size of the hole, that's a tough sell for people, but I tell you, it'll pay dividends in the future when that tree gets a great start. That's usually the limiting factor the biggest limiting factor I see to newly planted trees is a restricted. When you only dig the hole about the size of the root ball and stick it in there, it's going to really slow down the first 3 to 5 years of that tree getting established.
Mhm. And
So yeah, don't skimp on that, folks.
that's important also what you just said is 3 to 5 years, because I
Hmm.
think a lot of people, you planted it this fall and it leaves out this spring, "Oh, it should be good." But it's
Hmm.
really a 3 to 5-year window that that tree could still decline from transplant shock.
Yeah.
That first 3 to 5 years is important to make sure when we do have a drought that you are watering it, right? That winter damage, could really, if cold temps could really
Hmm.
affect them, during that time, because that 3 to 5-year window is when they're still
I
really
consider
getting
them a new tree.
established.
Yeah, 3 to
Mhm.
5 years is still a new tree to me, and I try to, emphasize that point when I'm meeting with people or teaching community classes. And you mentioned watering there. You talk about, like, frequency and, light versus deep watering in your programs, Jessica?
Yeah, and it really, I always tell people to start off with, like, think about it this way. 1, just pay attention to the forecast, right?
Mhm.
Because, like, if it's gonna forecast to rain and it's actually raining, you're not gonna have to be getting out there to
Yeah.
water. But you're gonna water, a little more often, at the beginning, right? And especially the
Mhm.
time of year you're planting. And just because, like, we're getting ready to plant these trees out here and it's November and we're starting to get into, like, cold, warm, cold, warm, we are still going to do, at least right now, before it gets really freezing, we're gonna have water bags put on these
Mhm.
trees,
Oh, yeah.
or they're at least gonna be
And
watered in.
that's a very slow watering. Those I love those
Yes.
Gator bags or whatever brand that you have. And if you're not familiar with those, it's literally a bag, usually green, that kind of blends in with the landscape. And sort of, what would you say, Jessica? They sort of just weep water. They'll weep 5 gallon of water over a very slow amount of time, but it's
Mhm.
a thorough, deep watering.
Right.
Uh, I love those tree bags. I mean, that makes a big difference when you've planted
Mhm.
trees,
And you can
especially if you
do
plant a lot of them.
like I said, we do the bags. People have used buckets before. I've
Sure.
used other containers on my at the house I used to live with, which my neighbors were like always confused what I was doing with these container. They would pick them up for me sometimes. They're like, "Your trash blew away," and I was like, "Well, that's how I was watering my trees, but thank you."
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Bring them
Yeah.
back. Um, but yeah, like nice and slow way of watering instead of just standing out there with a water hose trying to like flood it really
Yeah.
quickly. Because depending on how the
That
weather's
doesn't do
been, it might
much.
roll
Yeah.
off,
Well,
right? It
you could,
was
water quickly what you think is a good deep watering if you don't have much time, you go out there for 5, even 10 minutes, and if you really take a screwdriver or something and kinda drill down into the soil to take a look, you might not have gotten that soil wet more than 2 inches deep, and
right,
that's not gonna do anything much for the tree, and it's gonna make those roots go more shallow, and it's gonna create issues in the future. A thorough, less frequent watering once they get established, less frequently. I always tell people once a week if it's really thorough, maybe twice a week if it's the first year, but that's much better than going out every day for 5 minutes and throwing some water on top.
right.
Much better.
And
Much
like you
better.
said, not as frequent, right? We think about if
Yeah.
you water every day, then what happens when you suddenly can't water every day and it gets really hot and dry? Those trees
Yeah.
are going to be like, "What is going on? Where
Yeah. The
where's my
roots are
water?"
going to
And
be
then
just under the mulch. And you
yeah,
started talking about mulch, Jessica. Depth of mulch, what do you recommend?
2 to 3 inches in depth. So,
Yeah, so if you go
uh,
any more than that, it made me think about that. I guess that could also cause trouble if you have like really deep mulch, especially with shrubs and also trees, but especially with shrubs. I see that a lot where it's a really deep mulch and it almost acts like soil because it's dark under there, it's nice and thick, and if they have an irrigation system especially and they water frequently like once a day or something just in the landscape, they have a nice system. Goodness, shrubs are real lazy. Their roots will be right on top of the soil between the. If you have deep mulch, right between the mulch and the soil, will be most of the roots just right in that zone. And like you said, if that irrigation something happens to it, or if they stop watering, you'll see everything all of a sudden uniformly just wilt in the whole landscape. So, and that problem's made worse by really deep mulch. One other thing I'd like to get your take on, and you might cover this in your community classes, Jessica, is staking, more for trees than shrubs. You rarely have to stake shrubs, but what is your take and information that you give out on staking trees?
so I usually tell people unless it is like a high traffic area, unless it's very windy. You're going to get a lot of wind in that area. Or if you have a tree, I wish I could show you all my sad ginkgo picture that my husband brought home for me. He brought me a ginkgo that literally looked like Charlie Brown's tree, like bending over. Um, in those situations, that's when you want to stake. Otherwise, like
Yeah.
all of my little trees that I've planted at my house now, they're all bare root, but they're smaller, and the few bigger ones I have not staked them.
Oh, young
Um,
trees. Yeah, I love the fact that you usually don't have to because they're just smaller. They don't have a lot of top mass or top weight.
mhm.
And sometimes I realize you probably have to stake if it's a really windy location. But and Dr. Fountain also stressed this to our former tree specialist. He said, when trees move in the wind, that it initiates roots and a stronger tree.
Right.
So even if you stake, I've talked to cities before. I'm like, leave just a tiny little bit of slack in there. The tree does need to move a little. That's kind of a natural thing. I mean, if it's a high wind area and it's really kind of wallering out of the ground, that's sometimes a problem. You can still stake it without pulling a lot of tension on the staking
Yeah.
system. Yeah.
And other things to think about is a lot of times we see where people put stakes right up against the tree.
Mm,
You're putting those right in their root zone, right? So we want
yeah.
to try to put the stakes out further to the side. So you can get away with 2 to 3, you know, out past that root zone. So when we say that, like how far out do those branches go? That's how far out the roots are going. Something that a division of forestry person shared with me, and now I will always use it, is think about tree roots as like a pancake.
Hmm.
Okay. There are some that do go deep, but when you look at a tree, as far out as those branches go, that's where those roots are going. So it's more of like a pancake versus all the roots are just going straight down deep in that soil and they go out, right? So putting those stakes out by out past that drip line, you can use things like old bed sheets. That's what I've used with the trees in my yard. So they can wiggle in the wind. It's still supporting them,
Yeah.
but it's not really rubbing on that bark,
Yeah. You got to be
because
careful of
you
that.
want to avoid using wire with the
Hmm.
garden hose stuff. You could still do like string with garden hose if you leave it kind of loose. And the key with that is you're going to take it off in a year,
Yeah,
right? You're not
I
going to leave it
and
on.
that's a great point, and I said we usually don't stake shrubs. Where there was a local golf course that they'd installed a bunch of beautiful is arborvitae, Columnar arborvitaes, and they'd staked them because it was a really windy location. Well, I keep getting these phone calls where they planted them in mass for people because there's a housing development out on the golf course, and so they planted lots and lots of these. Well, the homeowners didn't have those installed; they were part of their home building process, but they were arborvitae, and arborvitae grew up around the it was wire that had some kind of coating on it, and then it used nylon rope, which was all good, flat nylon, sort of like seatbelt material once it actually touched the trees, and that was all fine. But the homeowners, the arborvitae grew up around that system, and they never removed the stakes. Now I have all of these arborvitaes where the tops are dying and breaking out of the arborvitae because they did not remove that staking material.
Hmm.
I mean, to the homeowners, to their benefit, I mean, they didn't put that in, so it wasn't on the radar to think about that. So now I've just basically been driving up and down. When I see that, I'll leave a note on the door that says, "Hey, this is probably the problem. You may want to address it," because the
Yeah.
tops of those arborvitaes are just falling out. But yeah, yeah,
So really,
staking.
just for like a year, honestly, until that
Yeah,
tree can
sure. Yeah.
get kind of established, and then take it off. So that's what we've past planting projects we've had to do some staking for a little bit of for the wind, but also because of parking. People were parking too close to the
Oh
new planted
goodness.
trees. Uh,
Yeah.
so we're getting ready for those trees to take the rope and stuff off. That the rope was very kind of loose. It was just barely snug on them.
Yeah.
Take the rope off, but we're still gonna leave those stakes in the ground around the perimeter of the
Just
trees for
for
another
like a barrier.
yeah, a
Yeah.
barrier, so
City trees are completely different because of traffic and them just being in the setting that sometimes they're in. There's special considerations we have to make. But, a lot of what we're talking about today goes for, like a municipal setup and a home setup. When we plant trees, like deciduous trees, great time now. When this recording drops, I mean, you're even in December, if the soil's right, it's a great time to plant, even up into December. If the soil's not frozen and it's in good shape to dig, go ahead and put the trees in the ground. I get a lot of questions on evergreens, which I prefer in the spring for evergreens. If you have to do evergreens, I really tell people do that and finish that up by late August, early September. They're much earlier than deciduous trees, which you said, Jessica, that's when the leaves fall on deciduous trees. That's usually what? Gosh, this year, beginning of November. But
mhm.
if I had to plant evergreens in the fall, I don't do that any later than the first week of September. Evergreens have to develop a root system because remember, they don't drop those needles and they have more water needs in the winter. My preference for those is in the spring. No pruning. What else? What's a recap here? Mind your watering, mind your digging hole. The
No
depth of the hole.
fertilizer.
No fertilizer, and of course, match the tree to the location. By that we mean mature height. What kind of sunlight exposure does it need? And
R and right tree, right place. Think about when
yes,
you
thank
planted
you.
it
That
right close to your house, how big is
yes.
that tree eventually gonna get? Are
Absolutely.
you
And
near power lines,
that is probably
water
the number
lines?
one thing. I call it the puppy effect. When you bring the puppy home, it's going to grow up into a bigger dog eventually, usually. So you have to be careful. Those trees that look really good, that 6 foot tall maple you bring home and you plant close to the home because it looks good at that time. You have to age everything forward in your mind. And I think most people are pretty good now. They'll say, well, how big's this thing going to get? How tall? Well, you also have to ask how wide and
Mhm.
make sure that you match up the site location to that tree's needs. So it's pretty straightforward, but again, if you make the considerations we talked about today, I think you'll have a better experience with your trees and have good success making those specific considerations, whether it's balled and burlapped container or like Jessica said and talked about the bare rooted trees. A few considerations to make for each one of those. So yeah. There's nobody to wrap us up today, Jessica.
I
It
know.
it
I was just
feels
going through my
weird.
head. I was like, "Oh, we
What
gotta say
what
all the stuff
what is
at the
this
end."
spiel? I know. So how are we going to wrap this up? We're going to tell people, as always, we are horticulture. That's 2 words that hangs up a lot of people. Hort space culture. You can look us up on Facebook. We're on there. You can look us up on YouTube, Spotify, of course. On Apple on podcasts there. And we also have a very active Instagram page. So look us up on any one of those platforms. I guess this will post pretty quickly, Jessica. Here, it's probably going to be November when folks are listening to this. So everything is very timely. And with that being
Yes.
said, I guess enjoy the holidays, Jessica.
Yes.
How are you guys? What are the current state of your household as far as the holidays?
Current state is getting all the Thanksgiving dinners scheduled. So, for
Oh, you're scheduling you, and it sounds like
yes.
you have multiple ones. So yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
So,
When you're busy doing all of that, just think about your trees as well and get those in the ground. But we thank you guys for joining us today. We'll have a few more of the podcast, the regulars on next week. But until then, we thank you for listening.